Chapter 1, The Calm Before the Storm. Alex couldn't help but feel a small pang of nostalgia as he glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the sunlight reflect off the hills behind them. Beside him, his wife Emily sat with her head tilted against the window, a peaceful smile on her face, lost in thought. And in the back seat, Nick, his best friend since college and business partner, was lazily stretched out, humming along to a classic rock song playing on the radio. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. He could still remember the beginning, when it was just him and Nick, two young men with ambitious dreams, starting their own small consulting firm. They had built the company from the ground up, fighting through every setback, celebrating every victory together. Nick had always been more than a friend, he was like a brother. There was a rare loyalty and trust between them, a bond forged through late nights, endless brainstorming, and shared triumphs. And Emily had been there through it all. She was the steady force in Alex's life, his anchor, the person who balanced his drive with her gentle wisdom and endless support. They were the three musketeers, as they liked to joke, and that's how Alex had always felt, secure, surrounded by the people who knew him best, who had been by his side in every success and setback. He felt lucky, blessed even, to have a life so well aligned, to share both his personal and professional world with those he trusted most. This trip to the mountains was meant to be a break from the daily grind, a chance to unwind, to get away from the emails, meetings, and endless calls. Alex had suggested it, feeling the toll that long work hours and stress had taken on him recently. Emily had jumped at the chance for a weekend in nature, while Nick had agreed enthusiastically, saying they could use the time to discuss a few new business strategies in a relaxed setting. The drive to the cabin was filled with laughter and easy conversation. They talked about old memories, shared jokes, and even made plans to explore the trails around the cabin once they arrived. Alex couldn't deny how much he enjoyed these moments, the simplicity of friends and family around him, the absence of agendas or interruptions. Yet, under the surface of his calm, a slight unease simmered. He wasn't sure what it was or where it came from, but there was a subtle feeling gnawing at him, like a whisper in the back of his mind. He brushed it off, reasoning that it must be the lingering effects of a few stressful weeks. Maybe he was just overtired, he told himself. After all, a busy life could have that effect. Sometimes, anxiety creeps in even when things are stable. As they pulled up to the cabin nestled among towering pine trees, Alex took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh mountain air. The peaceful isolation of the place seemed to silence his worries. The cozy log cabin had been a rare find, hidden away in the mountains with a view overlooking a serene valley. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, a place untouched by the outside world, where they could all unwind. Inside, the three of them quickly fell into an easy rhythm. Nick started a fire in the stone fireplace, Emily began setting up a cozy dinner, and Alex unloaded the bags. The cabin was alive with warmth and laughter, and Alex found himself thinking that this was exactly what they all needed. Maybe by the end of the weekend, the tension he'd been feeling would be gone. But that night, as he lay in bed with Emily beside him, he found himself staring at the dark ceiling, unable to shake the nagging sensation that something was off. He pushed the thought away, telling himself he was being paranoid. After all, Nick and Emily were here with him, sharing this perfect moment away from it all. He turned to look at his wife, watching the soft rise and fall of her breathing, feeling reassured by her presence. He thought of the many times she'd been there for him through hard decisions, always offering a word of advice or comfort, always knowing how to make him feel grounded. Beside him, she was sound asleep, her hand loosely resting on his. But as Alex finally drifted off to sleep, a sense of unease lingered, like a faint shadow at the edges of his consciousness, an almost imperceptible warning that he didn't yet understand. Chapter 2, The First Discovery. The next morning, the three of them decided to hike one of the nearby trails. The air was crisp, the ground damp from a recent rain, and the mountain scenery looked breathtaking. The forest around them was alive with birdsong, and the sun filtered gently through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the trail. Alex felt his mood lift with every step. They laughed, joked, and teased each other, the way only people with a long history together could. Nick, ever the adventurer, took the lead, guiding them to a spot with a panoramic view of the valley below. When they reached it, Alex couldn't help but admire the scene, the world stretching out below them, untouched and wild. "Hey, "Can you get a photo of me and Emily?" Alex handed Nick his phone, stepping back to wrap his arm around his wife. Nick took a few shots, adjusting for the light, then passed the phone back. Alex flipped through the pictures, satisfied with the result, and was about to pocket the phone when Nick asked him to take one of him with the view in the background. Alex was about to take Nick's picture when Nick's own phone buzzed in his hand. A notification popped up on the screen, a message from Emily. The preview was enough to make Alex freeze. "Missed you last night. Can't wait to see you alone later. XX," it read, with a small red heart at the end. Alex blinked, his mind struggling to process the message he'd just seen. It was just a message, he told himself. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, or maybe he'd read it wrong. But that unsettling feeling in his chest had returned, stronger than ever, gripping him like a vice. There was something undeniably intimate about the words. They were the kind of words he expected to see from his wife to him, not to his best friend. "Hey, you got it." Nick's voice broke through his thoughts, and Alex snapped out of his trance, quickly lifting Nick's phone to take the picture, pretending to focus on framing the shot. "Yeah, just a second," he murmured, trying to keep his voice steady. He took the photo, handed Nick his phone back with what he hoped looked like a casual smile, and turned away. But inside, a storm was raging. Every nerve in his body felt on edge, his mind replaying the words on that screen over and over again. The message was a crack in the perfect image he'd always held of his friendship with Nick and his marriage to Emily, a tiny fracture that threatened to split wide open. Alex took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't just jump to conclusions, it could all be a misunderstanding. Maybe it was just a playful message, something innocent between close friends. But deep down, he knew it didn't feel that way. As they continued on the trail, Alex became hyper-aware of every interaction between Nick and Emily. He noticed how often Nick would glance at her, quick looks that he probably thought went unnoticed. Emily seemed a little more animated than usual, her laughter ringing a bit too brightly when Nick cracked a joke. Her eyes lingered on him just a second too long whenever he spoke. Alex's stomach tightened as he took it all in. They were subtle things, barely noticeable, but now, with that message in his mind, every small gesture felt loaded with meaning. He felt as if he were seeing them through a new lens, one that exposed the tension he had never noticed before. He kept his suspicions to himself, forcing a smile whenever they looked his way, trying to act normal. But as the day wore on, the uneasy feeling inside him grew, like an ember that refused to die out. By the time they returned to the cabin that evening, he was exhausted, not from the hike, but from the mental battle within him, trying to convince himself that everything was fine. When night fell and they gathered around the fire, sharing stories and toasting marshmallows, Alex kept a close eye on them, searching for any sign, any confirmation of what he feared. And though they were careful, every now and then he caught a glance exchanged, a shared smile that didn't include him. He told himself he was overthinking things, that he was seeing patterns where there were none, but the ache in his chest wouldn't go away. Lying in bed that night, Alex stared at the ceiling, the words from Emily's message to Nick playing over and over in his mind. "Missed you last night." The way she had signed it with a kiss and a heart. It was intimate, personal, nothing like the way she normally messaged their mutual friends. In the stillness of the dark cabin, Alex felt a chasm opening between him and the people he trusted most. He knew he wouldn't be able to ignore it, it would haunt him, gnaw at him, until he found out the truth. And with that realization, Alex felt his resolve harden.
Chapter 3: Traces of Betrayal. Over the next day, Alex found himself watching every move Nick and Emily made, his mind caught in a whirlwind of doubt and suspicion. What had once seemed like a simple, friendly trip to the mountains was now charged with an uncomfortable tension. He tried to shake it off, telling himself to stay calm, to observe without jumping to conclusions. But the signs, the tiny fragments of behavior he once would have dismissed, now felt laden with meaning. It started in small ways. Nick and Emily seemed to find excuses to go off alone, whether it was for a quick walk to explore the grounds or to fetch firewood from the storage shed. Each time, they assured Alex it would only be a few minutes, and each time, those minutes stretched longer than expected. Alex would find himself standing by the window, watching them walk into the forest together, the sight of them disappearing behind the trees filling him with a growing sense of dread. Then, one afternoon, Alex noticed something that turned his unease into raw anger. They were all in the cabin's small kitchen, preparing lunch together. Alex was slicing vegetables, while Nick and Emily were chatting, their voices low and intimate, sharing a private laugh. Alex's attention drifted to them just in time to see Nick reach over and touch Emily's hand, a simple, almost innocent gesture, but one that sent a shock through Alex. Nick's hand lingered on hers for just a second too long, and the small smile Emily gave in response felt unbearably intimate. They probably thought he hadn't noticed, but Alex felt as though the air had been punched from his lungs. That brief touch had shattered any illusion he'd managed to maintain. The evidence was right in front of him, plain and undeniable. This wasn't just his imagination, something was happening between them. Anger flared within him, hot and consuming. How could they be so careless? How could they let him see what was meant to be kept secret? But Alex swallowed his rage, gripping the knife harder to steady his hand. He couldn't confront them, not without proof. He had to be certain, had to find something undeniable to shatter whatever defense they might try to mount. And so he forced himself to act as if nothing was wrong, finishing up the meal with a hollow smile, nodding along to the meaningless small talk they tried to maintain. When lunch was over, Alex made an excuse to leave, telling them he needed to check on some work emails and make a quick call to his assistant. He left them in the cabin, their voices fading as he made his way to the car. His heart hammered as he approached Nick's car, glancing over his shoulder to make sure he was alone. He opened the trunk and began sifting through Nick's belongings, his movements quick but purposeful. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, just something, anything, that would confirm his suspicions. He knew it was risky, that if Nick caught him, it would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. But the need to know the truth drove him on, overriding any fear or hesitation. And then he found it, a small velvet box tucked beneath a pile of clothes. Alex's hand trembled as he opened it, revealing a delicate silver bracelet with a charm, a small, intricate heart engraved with the letter E. It was elegant, understated, and undeniably romantic. Alex knew with chilling certainty that this wasn't just a friendly gift, this was something meant to be intimate, personal, a message beyond words. He closed the box, his mind reeling. He could practically picture it, Nick slipping it onto Emily's wrist when they thought they were alone, a silent promise sealed between them. A wave of nausea rolled over him, but he forced it down, taking deep, steady breaths. He was no longer just suspicious, he was sure. They were betraying him, right under his nose, and in the place he had trusted them enough to share as friends. As he closed the trunk and returned to the cabin, Alex felt something hardened inside him. The truth was there, even if they hadn't spoken it aloud. But he would wait, he needed more. He couldn't risk confronting them without every piece of the puzzle in place. He would be patient, silent, until he had enough to unravel the lies they were weaving. Inside the cabin, he found them laughing together, lost in their own world, oblivious to the storm brewing within him. And with each passing moment, Alex's resolve grew stronger. He would gather every last trace of their betrayal, every hidden glance, every whispered word, until there was no room for doubt. Then, and only then, would he confront them with the truth they were so desperately trying to hide. Chapter 4: Confirming Suspicions. Alex had always thought of himself as a reasonable man, a person who believed in trust and honesty above all. But as the weekend wore on, he could feel those principles slipping away, replaced by something darker, a need to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. His suspicion had grown too loud to ignore, and the bracelet he'd found in Nick's car haunted him like an accusation. There was no room left for doubt, only the cold reality that his wife and his best friend were betraying him. He needed proof, a final confirmation that would expose everything they'd hidden. The opportunity presented itself that evening. After a day of tense, carefully managed interactions, Alex excused himself under the pretense of wanting to catch up on some business emails in the guest room. He told them he'd be busy for a while, subtly ensuring they wouldn't expect him to return soon. It was a gamble, but he was confident that left alone, they'd reveal something that would put an end to the endless loop of doubt in his mind. Quietly, Alex positioned himself just outside the guest room, close enough to see and hear them but hidden from view. His heart hammered in his chest, a mix of dread and anticipation building as he waited, his breath shallow. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to stay still, focusing on the voices drifting through the cabin. He heard them talking softly in the living room. At first, it was innocent enough, casual remarks about the weather, comments on the beauty of the mountains. But there was an intimacy in their voices, a familiarity that pierced Alex like a knife. He held his breath, his body tensed, waiting. As he listened, he caught a glimpse of them through the narrow gap between the doorframe and the wall. Nick was leaning toward Emily, his posture relaxed but attentive, his gaze fixed on her as though no one else existed. And Emily, she was looking at him with a softness, a vulnerability that Alex hadn't seen in years. Her eyes sparkled, her lips curved into a tender smile, and the warmth in her expression made Alex feel as if he were intruding on something intensely private. Then he heard Nick speak, his voice low and familiar. "It's been harder than I thought, keeping this from him. I don't know how much longer we can pretend, Em." Emily glanced away, biting her lip, and Alex could see the hesitation on her face. "I know, Nick. But we just need a little more time. I can't bear to hurt him, not like this. We need to figure things out first." Nick reached out, his fingers grazing her hand. "I hate lying to him too, but being with you, God, I wouldn't give it up for anything. Meeting you in the city, it's the only thing keeping me sane." Hearing that, Alex felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. The truth was there, stark and undeniable. They hadn't just stumbled into this here, in the mountains, they had been seeing each other for months, meeting in secret under the guise of work. They had carefully crafted a lie, both of them deceiving him, keeping up the illusion of friendship and marriage while they pursued their hidden affair. Alex forced himself to stay still, fighting against every urge to burst into the room and confront them, to demand explanations and expose their deceit. But he knew he couldn't, not yet. They would only deny it, would twist the truth to make him question his own sanity. No, he needed more. He needed to know just how deep their lies ran, how long they had been plotting behind his back. He watched as Nick leaned closer to Emily, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his gaze lingering on her with a longing that made Alex's stomach twist. Emily sighed, looking up at Nick with a look of helpless affection. "I hate this too," she whispered, "but we'll figure it out. Just, let's be careful, okay? We're almost through this." Their words echoed in Alex's mind, the weight of their betrayal settling over him like a dark cloud. He had heard enough. Without a sound, he slipped back into the guest room, closing the door softly behind him. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he tried to process the gravity of what he'd just witnessed. Every shared moment, every fond memory he had of Emily and Nick was tainted, corrupted by the knowledge that they had used his trust as a shield for their own selfish desires. But as the initial shock wore off, a cold determination took its place. Now he knew the truth. Now he could see them for what they truly were, two people willing to betray the one person who had trusted them the most. And soon, very soon, he would make sure they understood the full cost of their betrayal. Chapter 5, More Than Betrayal. After the confrontation he had overheard, Alex knew he couldn't leave things as they were. The pain of Emily and Nick's betrayal burned inside him, but something else gnawed at him, something darker. His instincts told him that there might be more at play. He could feel it, a lurking suspicion that the affair was only part of a larger deception. That night, as Nick and Emily chatted by the fire, Alex excused himself, claiming he needed to check a few emails for work. He shut himself in the guest room, his laptop glowing faintly in the darkness. He had access to the company's financial systems, something he rarely needed to use, but tonight he felt an urgent need to dive in. The business he and Nick had built together was supposed to be solid, transparent. But what if Nick's loyalty extended as little to their business as it did to their friendship? For the next few hours, Alex combed through recent financial records, looking at transactions he'd always trusted Nick to handle. It was a tedious process, each document requiring scrutiny, each line of data another hint. But Alex was nothing if not thorough, and as he dug deeper, he began to see patterns, small discrepancies, subtle shifts in accounts that he hadn't noticed before. At first, they seemed like innocent errors, easily overlooked. But then he noticed irregular charges labeled as consulting fees paid to obscure third-party companies. He followed each lead, opening files, checking invoices, tracing every dollar. The trail wasn't obvious, but as he pieced it together, a picture emerged. Nick had been funneling company money into shell companies, obscuring his tracks with layers of fake expenses. With a growing sense of horror, Alex realized the implications. Nick had been using the company's resources for his own benefit, and each fraudulent transaction had Alex's name attached, making it appear as though he were the one authorizing the shady transfers. If anyone investigated, the trail would lead straight to him, tarnishing his reputation and potentially ruining him. Nick had built his betrayal into the very foundation of their company, putting Alex's entire career at risk. But what stunned Alex even more was the realization that Emily likely knew. She had access to their finances, he had trusted her with the personal side of their accounts, the family's investments. There was no way she hadn't seen these transactions. As he stared at the figures on his screen, the evidence was undeniable. She had been complicit. Not only was she cheating on him with his best friend, but she was also protecting Nick's secret, safeguarding his betrayal and helping him hide it. Alex felt an overwhelming mixture of anger, disgust, and a sense of deep violation. It was as if he were seeing the true faces of the two people he had loved and trusted most. Emily wasn't merely Nick's lover, she was his accomplice. Together, they were dismantling Alex's life piece by piece, taking his marriage, his friendship, his career, and now even his financial stability. They had stripped him of everything he had built, everything he had believed in. Closing the laptop, Alex sat in the darkness, his mind racing. It was no longer just about personal betrayal. This was a calculated move, a strategy to undermine him entirely. If he confronted them now, they would likely twist the narrative, using his reaction against him, painting him as unstable, paranoid. No, Alex realized, he had to be careful. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. He needed to protect himself, to expose their scheme on his own terms, and ensure they would face consequences far worse than anything they could imagine. In that moment, he felt a strange sense of calm. The pain had transformed into something colder, sharper. He would not let them destroy him. He would gather every piece of evidence, every file, every trace of their deceit. And when the time came, he would watch as the lives they had tried to steal from him fell apart, leaving them with nothing but the ruins they had built for themselves.
Chapter 6, The Final Straw. The evening air in the cabin felt thick with tension, though neither Nick nor Emily seemed aware of it. Alex watched them carefully as they sat around the fire, sipping wine and sharing stories from years past. But tonight, Alex wasn't interested in nostalgia. His focus was on the subtle signals between Nick and Emily, the glances that lingered a moment too long, the shared smiles that excluded him. He felt a simmering rage building inside him, his patience worn thin by the weight of the knowledge he now carried. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew quieter, and one by one, the others excused themselves to bed, leaving the three of them alone by the dying fire. Alex stayed seated, his gaze fixed on the flames, waiting for the right moment. Finally, when it was just the three of them in the soft glow of the firelight, he saw it, a quick, intimate glance between Emily and Nick, a look of shared understanding that sent his anger boiling over. Before he could stop himself, Alex spoke, his voice cold and unyielding. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Nick and Emily looked up, startled, a flicker of alarm passing between them. They exchanged a quick glance, but Alex cut them off before they could respond. "I know everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of his fury. "I know about the affair. And I know about the money, Nick. Every last cent you stole from the company, hidden behind fake invoices, routed through shell companies. All of it. The color drained from Nick's face, and Emily's eyes widened, her hand frozen midway to her mouth. For a brief moment, there was only stunned silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. But then Nick recovered, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow and forced. "Alex, come on," he said, shaking his head with an incredulous smile. "What are you talking about? This is ridiculous." "Is it?" Alex replied, his voice steady, his eyes hard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through the files he had saved, the spreadsheets, the incriminating transactions, even the shell company registrations he'd traced back to Nick. He held up the phone, letting them both see the evidence glowing on the screen. "I've been through every financial record for the past year," Alex continued, his voice cutting through their attempts to respond. "Every transfer, every fake consulting fee, every dollar you thought you'd hidden. You used our company like your personal bank account, and you tried to make it look like I was responsible. But you didn't cover your tracks well enough." Nick's confident smile faded, replaced by a look of barely concealed panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but Emily jumped in, her voice trembling. "Alex, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like. Please, let's just talk about this." "Not what it looks like." Alex's voice was sharp, laced with contempt. "Emily, I heard you two talking about your secret meetings in the city. I watched you sneak around, lying to my face, pretending that you cared about me. You've been lying to me for months, both of you, right under my nose." Emily's face paled, her eyes wide with desperation. "Alex, I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching out a hand toward him, but he pulled away, standing up and looking down at her and Nick with a fierce intensity. "Save it. Whatever excuses you have, I'm not interested. You think you can just take everything I've built, my trust, my marriage, my business, and walk away unscathed? You're both fools if you think I'm going to let you get away with this." Nick, visibly shaken, tried to regain control, his tone turning defensive. "Look, Alex, business is complicated. You wouldn't understand. I did what I had to do to keep us afloat." "Keep us afloat?" Alex laughed bitterly. "You mean keep yourself afloat. You've been stealing from me, from the company, while lying to my face about everything." And Emily, he turned to her, the anger in his voice softening, replaced by a deep sadness. "I trusted you more than anyone. I thought you were my partner in everything. But you chose to betray me with him." Emily looked down, her shoulders slumped, guilt and shame etched into her face. For a moment, it seemed as if she might say something, but the words died on her lips. Alex straightened, his voice cold and unyielding. "I've already started the process of transferring everything I can out of your reach. When I get back, I'll be filing a full report. The company, our home, everything you thought you could take from me, it's over. This little scheme of yours? It's going to be your ruin." Nick and Emily sat in stunned silence, the weight of Alex's words sinking in. The fire between them had died down to glowing embers, casting a faint light over their faces, now shadowed with fear and regret. Without another word, Alex turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as he left them to confront the wreckage they'd made of their own lives. For Alex, the night had finally brought him the resolution he needed. There was no going back, no room left for forgiveness or reconciliation. All that remained was the cold satisfaction of knowing that their betrayal would be their own undoing. Chapter 7, Retribution and Release. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains, casting the cabin in a cold, silent glow. Alex had barely slept, but his mind was clear, sharper than it had been in weeks. He'd made his decision. Without a word, he gathered his things, moving quietly through the cabin, determined to leave Nick and Emily behind, both here in this cabin and in his life. He took one last look at the place that had once symbolized friendship and love, now tarnished by betrayal and deceit. With a final breath, Alex walked out the door, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions alone. The morning air felt fresh and bracing, filling him with a renewed sense of purpose as he climbed into his car and drove away, leaving Nick and Emily in the isolation of their own choices. As he descended the winding mountain roads, Alex's thoughts turned to the future, to the steps he would take to rebuild his life. He knew the path forward would require courage and focus. His first priority was to confront the mess Nick had left behind at their company. He had no doubts now about what he needed to do. Arriving back in the city, Alex took immediate action. He contacted their company's legal team, presenting the evidence of Nick's financial misconduct. With careful planning, he initiated the process to formally remove Nick from the company and began restructuring their firm, reclaiming his stake and rebuilding his reputation. Every call he made, every document he signed, was a step away from the betrayal and a move toward reclaiming his life. Emily tried reaching out to him multiple times over the next few days. Her messages ranged from pleas for forgiveness to desperate attempts to explain her actions, but Alex ignored them all. He had no room in his life for her excuses, no desire to reopen wounds that were already starting to heal. He knew that engaging with her would only tether him to a past he was ready to leave behind. The first few weeks were difficult, haunted by memories and regrets that felt like shadows in his mind. But Alex stayed focused, dedicating himself to his work and to the process of reclaiming his life. Slowly, the anger began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve. He had been betrayed, yes, but he had survived it. He'd faced the worst, and now he was ready to rebuild, to become stronger than he'd ever been. In time, Alex found a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had removed those who had undermined him, taken back control of his career, and built a new foundation on his own terms. Each step forward was a reminder that he wasn't defined by their betrayal, but by his ability to overcome it. And so, Alex moved on, leaving the pain and bitterness behind, determined not to let the actions of others define his future. He was ready to live for himself, free from the shadows of the past, and focused on the life he could now shape for himself, honest, whole, and unbreakable. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.